Good afternoon and welcome to episode number 5 of season 2. Let me first apologize for the late starting there with about 3 minutes. We had a challenge with the connection with Professor Twani, our guest this afternoon. But we're here now. That's all that matters. These conversations every end of the month, we have what we call a web talk. It's like a mini lecture so that we can engage deeper into the content of what we are about as the choralists. So Professor Twani will be presenting one of those. Thank you for joining us on Facebook. Thank you for joining us on YouTube. And feel free to engage. Listen to Prof. Type your questions in whatever stream that you are watching on, Facebook or YouTube. Send your comments. We are going to show those comments so that Prof can engage kuzo. Those that will be watching the stream in future, thank you so much for watching as well, and make sure more people are getting to engage in these conversations, because I personally believe that we are going to grow the choral music genre in South Africa through engagement, through not being afraid of engaging one another, through touching on the topics instead of just complaining that nobody cares about choral music. What is it that they know about choral music? What are we telling them, the people that we say they don't care about choral music? Are we trying to educate them? How far have we gone in that? So our guest this afternoon, Professor Zoliswa Twani, is the current director of the Miriam Makeba Center of Performing Arts, also known as the Eastern Cape Audiovisual Center of the Faculty of Social Sciences and Humanities at the University of Fort Hare, located in East London. She's a musicologist with a PhD in musicology from the University of Witwatersrand, Wits University. Her interdisciplinary approach to research and published articles is on music and values, music and language, music and gender, music and politics, music and identity, with a chapter on music and renewal of identities in a South African prison in the book Music and Identity, Transformation and Negotiation, published by African Sun Media, and a book Music Behind Bars, Empowering and Rehabilitating Offenders, published by Lambert Academic Publishing. She supervises and examines postgraduate research nationally and internationally. Her teaching expertise is mainly in historical musicology, Western music history, world music, and African and South African music. Her qualifications, experience, and contribution in music education, community engagement, and the music industry in general spans over a period of 30 years as an external examiner, adjudicator, and evaluator of academic programs. She has facilitation and adjudication experience in a number of musical genres for a variety of public and private organizations, provincially and nationally. Ladies and gentlemen, today Professor Zoliswa Twani is here on the Choralist Conversations to present a web talk. And the topic that we'll be presenting this afternoon is Choralism and Politics before and after 1994. Let me invite Prof Twani so that she can get on with her talk. Good afternoon, Prof. How are you? Can you please, Prof, sorry, can you please unmute yourself? The youth of today would say those nails are on flick, Prof. Let me see if I can assist you as well. It looks like You muted yourself on the other side, so I can't unmute you on my side. But whilst Prof Usa trying to unmute herself there, we are now closing the Women's Month after 4 engaging episodes led by great women in choral, classical, and opera space. From the first one that we had, I think it was on the 2nd of August, where I had a conversation with Dr. Bronwyn Forbey. And then after that, we had a conversation with 4 women, Mrs. Majiza, Mrs. Ngata, Mrs. No, Mamfenyana, and the next week we had Miss Lihubie, Huitmang, and then after that, yes, Prof is back and she is going to take over. Prof, how are you?
I'm sorry about that, Smooth. Good afternoon to you and the viewers. I feel like the days of what we used to call the NRF's Traveling Institute. This was an institute, an academy that was set to encourage research in music, and we would travel from one university to another. And this weekend, I'm not at home, I'm in a stranger environment. So things are not working okay for me.
Such is life. We forgive you, Prof. We forgive
All
you.
right.
How are you actually? How are you?
Well, I'm very well, thank you so much. And I'm grateful to the Lord that one is still breathing and alive when so many of our friends and our age group, have passed on. But we are
Yeah, yeah. It's such a blessing. I mean, every time I pick up a phone and I speak to my parents, I am always worried about them. And as ntanga zakho, actually they refuse not to go to funerals. you,
yes.
you say whatever, they will tell you. I Umamute what the last one. You know what, I have like 4 masks that I go around with. On the other side I have a sanitizer. I sanitize every minute. So they have all the tricks now. So but Prof, because there's this important webinar happening at 4 where choral
Yes.
men are called to take action against gender-based violence. So I think let's get on so that we can engage and then be able to also join the other one at 4 o'clock. Thank you so much, Prof. Over to you.
Yes. All right. Thank you, Swoo. Let me start by saying if I go over time, feel free to stop me because I know this is quite a lengthy discussion, not really tailor-made for this platform. So don't feel embarrassed when you have to stop me. To
No
my
problem.
viewer, yes. Our topic for today, I'm talking about choral music and politics in South Africa. And I'm looking at it from before and after 1994, going forward. And I believe there's a lot of upheavals that we are going through as the choral music sector. So I start introducing this topic with a favorite saying of mine, with a favorite theory presented by one of my favorite sons. I call them that, Utembela Vogwan. He writes in 2005 and makes an observation that indigenous South African choral music is a struggle in song. And I quote, a struggle in song. This is due to the lack of inaccessible scholarly material, including archival evidence on this important local music activity that has evolved over the past century, into one of South Africa's cultural practices. But there's very little that is written about it in the academy. And here you have a choral practice that involves hundreds of thousands of singers, many conductors, lots of directors, lots of composers, accompanists, adjudicators, administrators, sponsors, you name them all. But why is it a struggling song? That's one of the questions that I want us to attempt answering today. And we all know choral music is broadcasted everywhere in all SABC television and radio stations. Regionally, nationally, competitions are held, and you have throngs of audiences flocking the venues to listen to this beautiful music that is made by these beautiful people, especially those who are Black and beautiful like myself. And but this music is inaccessible. You don't find it, you hardly find it in the curriculum at our universities and our schools, in fact. You know, there are very few people who are doing research on it, but however, it's a tradition that has gone beyond 150 years. And I like also what Grant Olwage says. He calls it Victorian choralism. This is the first time ever that a provision, you know, of an overview of the early history of choralism in the Eastern Cape, in particular in South Africa, is presented by Grant Olwage in 2005, who writes about the coming of the missionaries and their intentions to teach music, to convert our people, and in so doing, teach them music and education and their culture as well. And so if anyone is interested, find this scholarly work by Grant Ulrich and go through it. He presents a very interesting notion. And for me, this is where you first begin to see choral music and politics in action. But although it's underplayed, you know, it's very low key. Why do I say that? Grant is positing that Victorian choralism was used to slot individual choristers, individual composers into a hierarchical social strata. How? Through graded choral music training for self-improvement, for societal occupation, and for status. Because when choral music was practiced in those days, in the early history, it was done by people who were educated, people who were in schools, or Tatuti Soka, or Enoch Sondonga, or Umfundisi Umbambani Mzimba, my great grandfather, pray to say that, who started the Presbyterian Church of Africa. So, by implication of what Olwage is saying, the way in which choral music was taught to those early African intellectuals was through subtle and manipulative process of set standards and examinations so that our people could study choral music in order to be productive and move up the social ladder, because in the society, in the communities, they would then be seen as the people who were educated, the Black elite who were learning the music of the white people. And then, so you find that choral music then became a tradition, you know, popularly known as ikwayala okanye amakwaya, a tradition that was associated with musical entertainment of the Black middle class in the early years of the 20th century. I want us to note that. So that's where it comes from. Tembela also spoke about this on this platform previously. And then also I want to highlight a few other people who give different names to choral music. Veit Elman in 1991. He calls it music in the early 20th century. And these were groups of Black people, amongst them a lot of Black middle class who were performing this music. Now let's look at the discussion itself. I'm going to highlight also Selimovic in 2012. I like what he's saying, because he says choral music is made up of choirs of voices. Choirs of voices in which the separate strands of South Africa are brought together and reflect through their diversity the turbulent history of the country itself and its uncertain present. Don't you think we're still at that point? Okay. This is perhaps more evident of what Selimovic is saying, more evident in the history of the present national anthem of South Africa, a product of competing nationalisms during the 20th century. Copland writes beautifully about this. Taruskin also theorizes that the rise of nationalisms, remember I talk about two nationalisms, the rise of nationalisms in South Africa stems from the period from 1905 to 1940. What happened here? It is marked by two separate nationalist movements, two separate national anthems, okay, for most of the 20th century. And we know those, Distem van Suid-Afrika and Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika, as symbols, you know, that were used of striving for the respective people, the Afrikaners and the Black people. And why am I bringing this here? I'm bringing this here because I'm talking about choralism and politics. In contestation, Richard Taruskin says, these marked the racial division of the South African society and represented the national anthems of South Africa for the Black and Afrikaner communities during the apartheid regime. Some of us know that, the younger folk may not know that. With the first democratic government in 1994, what happened? We then begin to see the process of unifying South Africans, which started with the merging of these two national anthems into a single national anthem, the one that we sing today, you know, and this one includes at least 5 languages as an identified strategy to unify South Africans and also to pursue the reconciliation agenda of the Government of National Unity. Do you remember that? Government of National Unity. When we attained our freedom, that's the first type of government that we got in South Africa under the leadership of the erstwhile and the late first Black president, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. So this theme of separation and reconciliation also emerges in the history of Black choralism, as I narrated below. And Sbu, I don't know, I'm hoping that if I do well today, you may call me back some other time, because I do want us to talk about our national anthem as it is, because there are lots of problems there.
Definitely.
Now, yes. Now, let me move on now to talk about this theme of separation and reconciliation in the history of Black choralism. Now, here we see the national anthem being looked at as a tool for deunifying and unifying the practices in choral music amongst the Black and white communities. Now, I take you to something that I read from Nolthando Mpola's thesis, PhD thesis in 2007. And I'm bringing her name deliberately, the late Nolthando Mpola, because in our month this year, we haven't mentioned her name, and she deserves to be mentioned for the great work that she did. So she writes, serious choral music, as some writers refer to it, within the Black community in South Africa, is now about 150 years old. Of course, it's more years now. The first composers, which is something that Tembela also alluded to, were products of colleges like Lovedale College, products of St. Matthew's College, Inanda Seminary, Hilltown, and many others. And their music was largely published by Lovedale Press. So these early Xhosa composers graduated from the mission schools under the tutelage of white missionaries in schools as I've mentioned them. So Mbola's assertion is that the early Xhosa choral composers were a product of missionary work established over its colonies, because we call them colonies then, we didn't have provinces, and spread the English language and traditions through education and religion. The tonic solfa system, as we have heard already, was a system that the missionaries introduced their schools to. And it is now firmly fixed in the curriculum. I'm not going to get into that. So Always continues to point out that Black people were trained for efficiency in vocal music through the use of tonic solfa. And it is through this system that choral singing in South Africa continues to receive the greatest support and growth. And thus, Vokwana in 2005 insists that missions and missionaries, I quote, were the cradle of indigenous choral music. That's where choral music was born. That's what that means. Okay, now let's move a little bit. Always insists again that as they were studying music according to the graded system and writing exams according to the graded system as taught by the missionaries, these early Xhosa composers, these early Xhosa intellectuals, they kind of conformed. Pressure was exerted over them to keep apace and to stay together by slotting their achievements according to the ranks, because there will be those who are studying music at elementary level, those at intermediate level, those at advanced level. So Always posits that as a political technology of the body. So choral music to him and the use of the tonic solfa was a tool for political technology of the body. How many of our Black choralists can sing from a staff notation today? A lot of them are aptly doing it very well, singing from tonic solfa, but how many can do it on staff notation? Okay, so I leave you with that question. That's choral music and politics to me. So from taking it from Tembela's notion that choral music was actually the missions and the missionary work was a cradle of indigenous South African choral music, I therefore posit in this paper that society, the South African society, was ill prepared in recognizing that this educational strategy, of choralism, of using tonic solfa, and this musical apartheid, because it was a musical apartheid to have others reading from staff notation and others just simply reading from tonic solfa. Okay, so I call it was an educational strategy, but also a musical apartheid in my eyes and my ears. But society was ill prepared, in recognizing that this would be the most powerful tool for cultural reconciliation of diverse racial groups in South Africa. Why do I say that? How many of us thronged the Standard Bank Arena to listen to the Sowetan Nation Building Choir Festivals, which were championed by both Professor Mzilikazi Khumalo and Dr. Richard Koch? Yes, a very strong tool to dismantle the musical apartheid, because the choirs there would be made up of black and white. The orchestra is there in its full force. Later developments, I dare say, of choral music include programs like Tirisano. Mr. Matthews will tell us very much, a lot about that, which is now called South African Schools Choral Estate Fort, funded by ABC Mutsipe. The Old Mutual National Choir Festival, to name a few, Melting Pot, and all of the others that came through. And when I talk about Old Mutual National Choir Festival, and this, I cannot but mention the contribution, the huge contribution that was made by the late Professor Kabim Gom. And remember, he started coming up and introducing a series of competitions, not just that one, a series of competitions, including what was called the Ford, choirs, and which later became the Old Mutual National Choir Festival. So he was a progenitor of that. So you see, all these efforts by the missionaries to educate Black South Africans as choristers, using tonic sulfur, using musical apartheid, they should be understood as both religious, educational, and a political exercise that has subsequently given rise to a shared musical heritage and identity, and which may form the basis of establishing national unity, as we thought. So, because within these competitions, Black and white choristers, soloists, and musicians interact in a musical and cultural tapestry that defines one of the strongest musical traditions in South Africa, that is choral music. Now, I want to talk about recognizing the role of choral music in past and present narratives of freedom, because it played a role there. I'm going to start by something that I call socio-cultural divisions in our communities. We see now that the first Black composers like John Knox Bokwe, Tio Soga, Enoch Sondonga, Mbamba Ndimzimba, my late grandfather, I mentioned him. You see that they were direct products of the missionaries, by contact and through educational influence. And some of them took up religious ministry as Christian converts. And this is mostly what my great-grandfather did. By the turn of the 20th century, it had already become clear that at least 3 types of Africans emerged as a direct result of the interventions of mission education, urban industrialization, and resistance to the ripple effects of change that were sweeping the country at that time. What do I mean? The early African intellectuals such as Bokwe in 1917, Jabavu in 1960, Mthethwa, cited in Mbola in 2007, categorized Black people according to 3 distinct sectors. 1, amaqaba. This is a Xhosa word. There were people who were called amaqaba. There were people who were called, sometimes they would be called abantu bembola or abantu ababomvu. Why call them like that? This referred to the red ochre that the traditional people of South Africa used to put on their faces, for decorative purposes. But because of okwakuqaba, in isiXhosa we call it ukuqaba, because of that red ochre, they were then referred to as amaqaba, because they were putting this red ochre on, or abantu ababomvu, because it was red ochre. And then you have another group, a well-distinguished, well-educated group. This is where your Bokwes, your Tio Sogas, your Mzimbas belong. The people that were called izifundiswa, or amakholwa, or they will be called amagqobhoka. And these people graduated from the missionary schools, as indicated by Elphick and Davenport in 1997. So choral music in all this time was largely the preserve of these well-educated, this educated elite. So it was not practiced amongst amaqaba. It was practiced by these people. Then later on, with the missionary intervention, you have another group in the society that emerged. And these people were called amaqaqa. People who speak isiXhosa will know this word, amaqaqa. And I remember in my youth, amaqaqa would be referred to white people who were not so very rich, the poor white people. But I found out through research that this word amaqaqa initially referred to people who were converted by the missionaries, And they started going to school, like your Bokwes and your Sogas and your Sondongas and so forth. But then they dropped out of school for one reason or another. They would drop out, or maybe they would not cope with the education at the time. So those people would become misfits in that they would not fit into the society Amakaba, and also not quite fit into the society of Amakolwa or Amagqobhoka. So they were called Amagqaka. So this is the division I'm talking about. Much as choral music did the good, it also brought in these sharp divisions in the society. And you want to say you're a musician, you're not a politician. Here it was affecting choral music. And then I want to talk about the performance culture of this time in the turn of the century, 20th century, and the choral music practice. What was choral music like at this time? And some of us are going to relate to this story. So prior to the music competitions, which you are acquainted with today, the choral music competitions, they largely drew support from black choirs in the country. Ne? But before that, primary to the entertainment of the black elite, that is izifundiswa or amakholwa or amagqobhoka, the choral music concerts, they would hold a lot of concerts. And then they would have tea meetings. Remember, these were educated people, educated by missionaries. They're trying to emulate also the lifestyle of the missionaries. Remember, the missionaries, in teaching the black people, they gave them their music, their language, their education, and their culture. So the tea meetings were designed to emulate the lifestyle of the white people. Now, in these tea meetings and in these music concerts, there would also be literary readings, staging of plays, okay? So there was a high demand of choral music repertoire to be sung by the choral groups at this time. And even the white people would organize these concerts, and they would even take some of these composers overseas, to showcase the products and the work that they've done. And mostly they would take them to London, as Mbola posits in 2007. So during this time, you see a proliferation of choirs, which came from the middle class aspirations and notions of, I quote, proper leisure time activities. So all this resulted from both nationalist ideas of disillusionment with the white people's racist and segregational practices. Now, let's look at the format of these presentations, of these performances. And it is an interesting historical observation of merging of cultures. Now, the tea meetings, the Amagqaka and Amakaba, they would go and peep in the halls through the windows to see what the black elite were doing with the white people. And then they would observe that they have these tea meetings in which literary plays and readings were done. New music was also disseminated here. And so in these tea meetings, then because they couldn't pronounce the word tea meetings, so they called them itimiti. So that culture amongst Amaxhosa, etimiti. Itimiti became the extension of economic and social activities where the black elite people were imitating the lifestyle of the white masters. The white people they have tea time during in the morning and in the afternoon, and high tea would be in the afternoon, like 3 o'clock or so. So it is in those tea meetings, tea meeting, where new music would then be performed. Now, the style of the performances, the choirs would sing there, and then the audience would start bidding for the best choir that they want on stage. So the choirs would compete for one another, against one another to perform a specific song. And then they would make money during these concerts because there would be somebody who's collecting money for the best choirs that they were bidding to get on stage. That person, which in the old days we called Usputsu. So Usputsu was the master of ceremonies who was collecting the money as the choirs were getting on and off stage, and as the auctioning and bidding of the best choirs was taking place. So through these transactions, through Sputsu, these transactions were made, and Sputsu was chosen, not just chosen, but chosen on the basis of their intelligence and wisdom regarding the handling of the political discussions, because within this team as meeting, there would also political discussions that were taking place, And I quote here the late Makato. Now, in these team meetings, what was happening was that a lot of traditional action songs, which we call isdibili, would be incorporated into the music to bring about variety and contrast, while intentionally increasing the entertainment value of the competitions. At the same time, the same concert space, the same timidity was used for political activism through the team meetings, through learning of new political songs. And also they were used to inform the public of political developments in the country. So the MEC Usputsu played a significant role in diverting some of the activism as soon as unknown persons were encroaching or were near the venue. And these unknown persons, some of them would be political informants, which were called imbi. Ladies and gentlemen, please excuse me when you hear that tinkling noise. It's the alarm of the house that I'm in. It goes on like that. So just don't mind it. So itimiti, concerts, usputsu, they then formed, very much the fiber of the performance practice at this time. And I'm not going to go too deep into the action songs because I know Tembela, this is his research. But however, suffice to indicate that these action songs, remember, they were used to add to the entertainment value when the choirs were on stage. And so they would have actions choreographed, So we call them sounds, or we call them isdibili. And they were particularly favored by the audience. And they had become the common feature of choral concerts. Now, Ukaluza is said to be one of the people who started this whole notion of choreographing isdibili. Why? Because it was visible when the African choirs were on stage that they wouldn't stand still. You know us, when the music is on, we can't stand still. And so remember, the missionaries took everything. They didn't want all the traditions, the practices that were done in the communities to come into their workspace and into their church. So the choirs would sing there standing still, but the Africans couldn't manage it. So Kaluza devised actions, so that they are able to sing freely, and yeah. And then let me move on from there. So this was the choral practice at the time, and political ideas fused with choral music, and the political ideas would be reactions against the dominant white culture, for instance, And so I leave that whole notion of isdibili and Ruben Kaluza to Utembela, because I don't want us to run out of time. And then I just want to conclude by saying it is not possible really to delve into this topic within the confines of the time of this platform. So, but however, I do need to say that the musical genre, like choralism, has great potential to bring people together and contribute to further developing the already existing South African musical identity. And as we get into, we've seen the work done by Professor Mzilikazi Khumalo and Richard Koch, the work done by Professor Kabim Goma and the likes. We've seen all of that. But now, what are we doing? How are we reconfiguring choral music in the 21st century? Ladies and gentlemen, if you were not aware, we are now in the 21st century. So as we reconfigure choral music, and in our educational institutions in particular, remember here now we begin to talk about decolonizing our curriculum. The dialogue, therefore, should continue into the future. And it is not a complete dialogue if choral music is not addressed in our curriculum, and in particular, Black choralism. Not only in the practice of educating our youth on the history of South Africa, but also in order to instill those values, that we learned from choral music before. And before we get into our freedom, and just after that, I think people like Mzwandile Matthews, they need to come back here on this platform and tell us, he needs to tell us why he set himself to commission African composers to write such beautiful music on political themes. And we remember this era where you had composers like Mnomia, Qinisela Sibisi, Mama Tambo, Mahlangeni Ntungwa, Lungile Jacobs, and many others, and the late Dr. Makaya Mjana. They were part of these composers who were commissioned to write music on political themes. So this whole notion of music and politics, it stays with us. And I remember very well, vividly, Dr. Lindy Sisulu, when she was speaking at the launch of the Guild of choral music and indigenous music practices in the Eastern Cape, how she highlighted the important role that was played by choral music when they were in exile, singing in the Amandla group, others singing in other choral formations in exile. And she says their whole sanity was kept intact the whole time by participation in choral music events. And we know very well the song by O.R. Tambo, who was in charge of the youth and the music at the time, where he rearranged the song Uponi ihashe lami endilithandayo into umkhonto ibutho lami endilithandayo. So as I conclude, there is a song that I've asked Usbu to play, perhaps at the end. And this is a song that is about women as we close Women's Month. So I want in particular to challenge women composers. We've talked of Umama Tambo, and I know 3 capable women in the Eastern Cape: Umandi Sanguza, Reverend Kholisa Mlandu, Uweziwe Moya. And I'm challenging any other woman to listen to that song that Usbu will play for us and see if they cannot arrange something or do something about it. This song, I got it from the archives of the ANC, which are found at the NAHEX at the University of Fort Hare in Alice. This is a song that was sung by the Amandla group. And I note also, as I conclude, the recent endeavors and achievements by younger composers, who are now doing something interesting, something like gospel music encroaching into choral music, where gospel is becoming a strong feature. And I can cite composers like Obongani Makatyana, Ntutuko Sibisi, Celebration Ntungwa, Qinisela Sibisi again, Bongani Makatyana, all those young composers who are making it now. Melting Pot also has done a significant thing to bring together choral music and politics. There's a whole lot of compositions that came out during the Melting Pot festivals celebrating our political stalwarts like Nelson Mandela. I was listening to one of them just now before this webinar started from Mhlobo Wenen. So I'm challenging women at 3 levels. That song, I want you to do something about it. It was sung by the Amandla group. It was sung by women combatants of South Africa in the ANC camps. So listen to it and do something about it. Then I'm challenging women. And if not women, all South African composers, and particularly Black composers, to compose a South African choral anthem. A South African choral anthem. We cannot be this big society that has these competitions and we don't have a signature, anthem, or even a signature hymn for our competitions. This is something that will really begin to unite us as the choral music fraternity. Ladies and gentlemen, let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Side by side, we men of the West. Side by side, fight for freedom. Side by side, we men of the West. Fight for freedom now. Side by side, we men of the West. Side by side, fight for freedom. Side by side, we men of the West. Fight for freedom now. Oh, Siwala, Sukhamba Sani, Musani Utara, Tipaka Bukhari, Mataki Anuna. Musani Utara, Tipaka Bukhari, Mataki Aruna.
That's the song that Prof was referring to. Thank you so much, Prof. I must agree with you. The time is not enough for such a topic. But like I always say in these conversations, these are conversation starters. We after you have presented now, I'm sure there's a lot of people who are now seeing the need to engage in these kind of topics. Because I mean, I must confess, I've heard a lot about itimiti, but I didn't know where that came from. I grew up in that environment also of concerts is gasputu. That's what raised me in my village. We had an Istatamia group and other groups from villages around Leyetu, where we would travel from village to village, choir hosting a concert whereby people would pay, and then ngaphakathi kube umuntu ozawuthi ngale 10 rand le concert mayime umuntu uzaphinda acule, then uSputsu ke would do umsebenzi wakhe. So thank you so much, Prof. Let me acknowledge first, before we can engage in the last few minutes, the people who have joined us this afternoon. Abo Bud Atenkosi, Goniwe, or Mr. Matela there, or Malisedi, Mamsa Lukazana, Ulidia, and also a friend from the Kingdom of Eswatini, Mr. Mzwake, Innocent Kumalo, and many others. Ukona no Dr. Nompula, they're referring to
Phakathi la. Amen.
Yes, perhaps this is one of the questions that you will address with others that will be raised now, as athi ngosebuza phayana ukuthi how do we liberate our choral music, as we always suffer to find sponsors to sponsor our choral music. Perhaps, Prof, let me raise a few that I wanted to raise whilst you were talking. Firstly, thanks for acknowledging Dr. Nolthando Mpola. I-research yakhe, those that have not had a chance to read i-research yakhe, it's a thesis, a PhD that she wrote, efunda Rhodes University. It's about the analysis of text in choral music, comparing it to how people would analyze it text kwizibongo ngokwesiXhosa. It's a very interesting one. If you go there, you will actually discover a lot of composers, even the one whose song ekuthiwa it's a traditional song engaziwayo ivelaphi, le ethi Bawo Thixo Somandla. She acknowledges the composer and tells us about how that song was composed and when. Prof, you spoke about accessibility of choral music, which is a problem. During this period, Unjabulo Madlala eberana Amazwi oMzantsi awakapheli, when he introduced the part about South African art songs, then the competition became chaotic to some extent, that he even had to postpone because people were not finding scores. People were not finding contact details to even contact the composers of those songs. Besides Leonto, we have a challenge with choirs. Choirs lack professionally recorded songs. If you listen to radio that you were speaking about, TV and everywhere, you are hearing same music that was recorded during competitions. We need to get out of that circle. That's one of the things we need to speak about. Also, I was very interested when you spoke about choral music being used to classify people in the society. I asked myself, oh, was it then part of the systemic way to divide and rule the people, that you would then circle these ones and say, you are better because, Nina, you've learned choral music? Then the last one, which also came from a conversation ebeyikhona, Mrs. Umatlakala Bupapi raised the issue about South African Black choralism as being stuck in what missionaries taught us when they arrived, and therefore needs to be decolonized. She spoke about that. So I was just asking myself, so how do we then differentiate between what is good that was taught by missionaries and therefore keep that, and also, liberate ourselves from the bad that came with it? I-national anthem ke sawungena kuyo ngenye imini because it's another one that is so interesting. Other than that, we've got people who are really appreciating what you've given us this afternoon. Perhaps, Prof, you can comment on those few.
All right. Yeah, the quiet mouth, a mouthful. All right.
Yes.
Let me talk about this issue of accessibility of choral music. I think you, Prof Lucia, are going to start with a conversation. You remember what she had said. She's one of the people who had started archiving South African Black choral music, having started with Muerane, and now she is on Muhapelo. Yes. Okay. So you have pockets of researches that are done on choral music in South Africa. But in terms of that music becoming part of the curriculum, becoming part of academia, like they are in the libraries, they are in the archives, we don't have a coordinated effort around that. And I'm happy that Utembela left UNISA waza effort yaswaba ke UNISA ngolo hlobo, because now we are beginning to work on an archive for South African choral music, because this is his main field of interest. We are starting work around that. We are talking to other scholars, about that choral music archive. And once it is enriched, we're going to even come to your platform to talk about that. We have also now begun to establish a network of academics, people who are in the choral music space, to see if we cannot write a series, of books on South African choral music, so that it is well documented and archived. You do have students, I have quite a few at Fort Hare, I think, who are writing on choral music. I know people like Tami Zungu is doing something on choral music at PhD level. Butelezi Umhlaba, whom I'm supervising, is writing something on choral music. You also,
Muhau,
you should be one of those. You also, before Muhau, you should be one of those. And
I've made my commitment, Prof.
Yes,
and I'm going to stick with it.
Yeah, Umuhau is also working in this space. So we have quite a few researchers now that have started at Forte, which will kickstart that archive. Thank you. And then you talk about choirs that lack professionally recorded songs. And well, the reason may be one, finances, ne? But I'm also going to say to the choralists, let us stop this mentality of always going to beg. Ne? We need funding, yes, but when you go and request for funding, what are you bringing on the table? And in business, fortunately, you did an MBA. They talk about what they call the owner's equity. Okay, so owner's equity is your contribution to the project that you are fundraising for. So you should be able to say, when you present to your prospective funders, this is what I have in the bank. And sometimes we fail to recognize that even the choir uniform that you have, you can cost it into an amount of money, because those uniforms were made out of money. You bought material, you purchased, you paid somebody to do that work. So you cost all of that. That's your owner's equity. The money that you use to travel to the competitions, you can cost that and build it into the owner's equity, so that you see, you show that this is how much I've contributed into this cause. Please help me. And I think also it's because the people in the choral space, we're lacking education, about the business, the music business in particular. What are the things that we should be doing? You had a panel on this at some time, but it needs to be taken further. For an example, if the choirs, I think now where we need to start is also to start talking about the management of choirs, start training the choir leaders, the choralists who are leading in the space, because leadership is also lacking. So once our leaders' their eyes are opened and their antennas are up, are you with me? Then it will filter down through the crowd. There's also a biblical aspect into it. And I'm mentioning this because the very notion of the Black national anthem, Nkosi Sikelel' iAfrika, it has now sung with one verse, but there are 6 other verses that came from S.E.K. Mqhayi, which have a very strong biblical and human connotations in it, the humanistic view into it. So we need to start paying attention to that. And I mention this because there's a concept in the Bible that when you plant a seed, you harvest from that seed. Okay, so our choirs, our choralists, they are struggling even to, in fact, I see it as not having too much of a will, even to pop out 10 rand, for an example, for their choir. Why is it a struggle? Because if you plant that 10 rand, it will give you a harvest that can be doubled or even tripled, because you're doing something for your choir and you will be rewarded. The Bible says, okay, let me not go into that, but there is a biblical connotation into it. Give, it will come back to you. Good measure, shaken down, overflowing. We even finding difficulties, Tina, to assist people, choralists who have died. Why should that be? So if you can learn those principles, you will see a difference. Thank you. And then you also talked about choral music being used to divide. You know, this is a theory that always came up with based on on Foucault's theory of power, knowledge, relations. He talks about choral music as a political technology, you know, to reward and punish, to reward those who are conforming to the practice, to doing the things, and then to punish those who are not. But it is a very subtle technology. It's a subtle process. It's manipulative, but very subtle. You hardly notice it. You see, it's not out there. It's not overt.
Wow, that's
Yes.
a mouthful, really. Then you can touch on the last one, about the teachings of the missionaries, the bad and the good that came with it. Because
Yes.
I know in one of the conversations we were engaging on the issue of, I think Tembela was presenting, and then somebody raised the issue about the tonic sulfur. Some people want it to be done away with, which I don't agree with. But just generally,
Yes. All right. You see already, Smoo, the way that question is phrased, I'm not criticizing anyone badly, ne? But this is how we have fashioned ourselves to think, ne? About good and the bad. It's there.
hmm,
But do we always have to bring that to the fore? Ne? Conform and punish, reward and punish. You see, so we don't need to think in that straight-jacketed way, because everything that you have on this earth has got its advantages, it has its disadvantages. So my question is, to answer that question, if choral music and tonic sulfur notation, if what the missionaries did was so bad, why are we talking about it today? Why are we still singing that music today? And remember what I said earlier in my presentation, that Tembela calls it it's a song in struggle. Yes, there were ups and downs in it. There are still ups and downs in it. Okay, but he calls it the cradle, you know, of intelligence, choral music, because now it became a fertile ground which you could use as a tool to unify South Africa, as we have seen with Mzilikazi Khumalo and Richard Koch, as we have seen with the big competitions, Zolate, Professor Kabim Goma, Melting Pot, and so forth. We all become so united and one big family when we are there. That's the good that comes with it. We are born. So it's not always the bad things, you know, are the kind of things that we would talk about them in this fashion, not necessarily to say it should not be done, because there's a lot of good that happened in it. It is a cradle of our knowledge, you know, to unify South Africans through choral music, or through music, if you like.
Prof, thank you so much. I agree with you when you raised the idea about Mr. Matthews coming back. We spoke a little bit about it when he was here on this platform. That he got those composers to one space, and then they composed. So we need to engage on that so that we can have more of such initiatives. So I agree with you with that. It's one of the things that we must engage in, njengoba ke ixesha lihamba, because ke asizuyeka, these conversations azizuyeka, whether
Yes.
we're being challenged now because football is back. I know there are many people who would rather go watch football and then come back and complain that izinto zethu are not going according to how we want them. But some of us will stick around and engage on this. So thank you so much, Prof. Maybe just before sihambe, ikhona nje into encinci oburhalela ukuyishiya before sibe siyahamba, because iSabelane Music Initiative
Yes.
webinar is already
Yes.
underway.
It's just started. Yes, I want to in fact, it's about that, the Sabelani Music Initiative, Choral Men Against Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. So all I can say is, hey, otata bethu man, we encourage them. Go be part of this full force. And these are choral men who are speaking out, who are speaking up and saying, not in my time, not in my watch, no murder, no rape, no kidnapping, all abuse of women and children is bad. We don't want it during our time. And that does not mean Usabelani is exclusively for men. It is also for females. I'm also a registered member, Kasabelani. Because, but what is doing is the choral music men, what they are saying are that they want to be at the forefront of this one. They want to lead this one, and lead from the stage, lead from the choral space stage to say no more abuse, no more killings of our women and children. So I leave the guys with this encouragement. Please be part of this initiative. It's part of us healing our society. It's part of the choralist also saying to the nation and to the world that we are actually with you. We understand, and we will not be doing it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. This initiative, I love it so much because I have been engaging with women on this platform, but see, engage at the level of choirs because choirs are dominated by men. So if we take a stand as men to say away with gender-based violence, away with discrimination of women, or abuse of women. We are conductors of young girls, and that gives us a lot of power over these young girls. It takes a man not to fall into that trap. So if we have our brothers who are conductors who are out there now denouncing these acts, it means we are going somewhere as choral music. Once again, thank you so much, Prof.
Can I just say one last thing? Just one last thing.
Yes, Prof.
I want to disagree. I want to disagree with everyone. I've heard this over and over again, that women, the choral space is the space for men. It may be for now, but I disagree. If you look at the choirs, how many females are there? There are more women than men.
Yes, there's more.
Yes.
It's
So
just
what this
in
means
front
is
of
that
them where we need to correct.
yes, the woman needs to wake up and turn the tables and stop saying this is a space where male are dominating. They are not dominating. Why am I the only black professor of music if men are dominating? Huh? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Prof. Ladies, Nimvile, Prof. We need more of you. We need more of Professor Twanis out there. And this is not the last Mama Ozaube Elapa presenting these web talks. One of them will be Uma Munomusa Siliki. She is also going to present another one in the few coming months. So let's wait for that. Next week, we move on with the Choralist conversations. Remember, I said we are going to be engaging on music rights, educating ourselves as composers, performers, choirs, soloists, everyone who engages with music, organizers will be talking about music rights, how to go about registering your music, and how you earn, what you earn from, all of that. Please join us at 3 o'clock next week. Choir Hour continues on Thursday. We go to Eswatini with EHM Correctional Services next week, conducted by Mr. Melisizwe Zwane. Umangete will be here on the Choralist at 7 o'clock on Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon as we leave to go support Isabelani Music Initiative. Thanks so much.